Greetings, pilots, and welcome to Fly's Flight Academy. My name is Kovakis, otherwise known as Flyteco on SWTOR, and today we're going to be beginning the first episode within my GSF guide tutorials. This is aimed for beginners, and I will be ending with more beginner-esque things. If people would like to see more intermediate or advanced things, please reach out to me. I will have you can always contact me in game at Flyteco. I am on Satil Sean for the server, so you can reach me there. And to start out, we are going to be doing some fairly simple things to get you guys started on your journey to playing in GSF. GSF, for those of you that don't know, is called Galactic Starfighter. It is the space combat mode that is within SWTOR, and it is fairly fun. However, more than often than not, I hear new GSF pilots complain that it is a complicated mode, and they are not warranted, or they are warranted in saying that, as it is a complicated game mode, and it does require a lot of practice and a decent bit of game knowledge to understand how to fully play it. That said, to get you started out, it's not too difficult. As you can see, I am on the fleet. I am a Republic side pilot, by the way, so anything I reference will always be on Republic side. I unfortunately am not that well versed on Imperial side, and typically won't be, as building a new character in GSF isn't particularly the most fun thing in the world, so I will remain Rep side, but do have a decent bit of knowledge when it comes to Imp side builds. They don't necessarily vary between the sides, but certain things later on, late game, when you're building ships, change. So for that, feel free to reach out for me. But let's get started. So as you can see, I am in the combat training section of the fleet. This is the Republic fleet. This will be flipped on Rep side, so it'll be on this module, I believe. And you want to look for this node in particular. It is on the inner corner, right here in the bottom left, or the top right over here-ish for Imp side. And you want to get real familiar with this area right here in particular, not necessarily for any of the people here, but for this little box right here. You'll see that it has a little triangle above its head, and, well, not above its head, above the terminal. That is what you want to see. I currently have the mission selected, so I'm going to go ahead and abandon that so you guys can see what it looks like when you have a mission for GSF. So when you open this, you will, if you're a new player, you won't see any of this. You'll see two intro missions. One will say Intro to Warzones, and one will say Intro to Starfighter. You want to look for the Starfighter section, and your first objective to start Starfighter is to pick up the intro mission. What the intro mission is it is essentially asking you to play one match of GSF. Win or lose, it does not matter, and it will give you a huge boost to these things right here. They're called requisition grants, and they gain you the necessary points to level up ships. The original boost from the intro mission is substantial. It will get you either a new ship unlocked, which as a veteran I highly suggest you don't do, or it'll fully level one of your starter, or almost fully level one of your starter ships. It'll get most components up to max ranks, if not halfway-ish through. And overall is, in my opinion, one of these better intro quests. It's just asking you to try the mode and see what you think. I will put this disclaimer here right now. Never be on the notion that you are going to win immediately in GSF. There are most definitely people that have been playing for a long time, myself included, and we tend to lone wolf and or run in groups. And generally speaking, we want to finish our dailies and weeklies as fast as possible, so we are looking to win at all costs. So with that in mind, you're probably going to face some people that have been doing this for way too long and just kind of know the game as a whole. I can safely say that your first 2 or 3 matches, as you're adjusting into GSF, are not going to be kind to you. You will most likely die a decent bit. If you are more of a natural and have played any flight simulation games, or frankly any of the old Star Wars Starfighter games, then you might have a better chance. However, I will say Starfighter is a bit of a weird mode, or a bit of a weird game mode, as it's not necessarily flight simulator-ish. It has decent physics, and I believe that it is one of the stronger Starfighter games that I've played. Of course, there's the new Star Wars Starfighter game that came out, but I have never played it, and frankly don't intend to, as it is A, expensive, and B, another time sink, which I don't have time for. So, once you pick up your intro quest, you are going to go through a nice little quest progression chain. Sorry, my English is rough. You will first complete the intro, and then you will unlock your first daily and weekly. A daily, as you can see, is 2 points towards completions. In other words, 2 losses, or 1 win, as wins count as double points. This is one of the faster and easier weekly and daily combinations, as they don't require straight wins, they just require you to play. So as long as you spam matches, you'll get fairly far fast in GSF. I do recommend you attempt to practice, but in saying that, the rewards for GSF are well worth your time anyways, as they give fleet combinations, which can be converted to credits essentially, tech fragments, which are essential to late game, and isotope stabilizers, which if you're a crafting junkie, these will be good for you. They will also give you requisition grants. These are used to progress your ship even further past your initial intro quest, and you will get a lot of them fast. You get 1 per completion of a match, and some from your weekly and daily. Your daily gives you 1200, which isn't too much, but it's a good little boost, considering you can do this per day. And generally speaking, it only requires you to do 2 matches, which isn't too hard currently. GSF has slightly made a resurgence, but not quite in the way that I wish it would. But I don't think it'll ever quite reach the peak that it used to have when it first came out, so there's that. Prepare for sometimes there will be a long queue kind of in the middle of the day-ish. However, once you have these, as I stated, the rewards for these are amazing. However, there's not just monetary and game mode related. There is actually a huge conquest benefit to this. If you scroll down here, as you can see, we're currently in a GSF event, so this is a bit more staggered. But generally speaking, you'll be getting these 2, and the Achiever, which is for completing your weekly. The Achiever itself gives you 121k completing any character you do it on, essentially twice over. And if you don't otherwise complete the weekly, you'll have Conquer the Stars, which is just playing a match, and Dominate the Stars, which is winning a match. Obviously, you want to try and win if you're going for Conquest, but doing this is easy. And when we do come along to these Clash in Hyperspace, as you can see from playing some matches with essentially every type of ship aside from bombers, because I'm not a bomber player, you will quickly generate conquests. As you can see, this is just from sort of, I want to say 3 days-ish. I just recently returned to SWTOR. So this is a very short period of time that I gained almost 1 million conquest for essentially just doing what I like, which is kind of nice. BioWare did a nice job in amping up the GSF rewards. I wish they would do a little bit more, but we'll get into that if you ever want to talk about it. But for now, continuing on with those, you will be fairly set on continuing through GSF. I recommend playing it out, see how you feel. If you're struggling to understand the game mode, this is totally acceptable. It is a challenging game mode to understand, and I am here to help you fix that. First thing, we're going to go over the basics of the 2 game modes that you're going to encounter in GSF. These being, you're going to encounter Domination and Team Deathmatch. These are the only 2 modes that exist in GSF, and they are very simple and straightforward. Domination is a 3-point capture system, in which you will have 3 locations essentially drawn straight down the middle half of the map, with the outer 2 being skewed slightly more towards each side of the teams. But generally speaking, they're fairly accessible no matter what. This game mode is practically and entirely driven by your objective control. This means the more control points you have, the faster you're going to win, and the less you have, the higher you are likely to lose, which is not too It's not too hard to swing back in Domination, however, it is challenging if you get the dreaded triple cap. It is very, very hard to come back from that, but you still can do it. So always try your best in Domination, as it is one of the more balanced game modes, in my opinion, between the two, and generally is a good way to practice. If you get Domination, play ships that you generally wouldn't. Domination allows a lot more playstyle variance than TDM does, in my opinion, and is generally a nice place to learn, as it is the encompassment of all that GSF is. The second mode is Team Deathmatch. This is your kills only count sort of deal. The objectives that can be found in Team Deathmatch are these little buff pucks. I'll put a little image up here so you can see it eventually. But these are just flat boosts to your ship. There are 4 that you will encounter. There's a damage boost, which looks red, a weapon overcharge, which looks yellow, a shield overcharge, which I want to say is blue, and a speed overcharge, which is purple. The damage overcharge, as it says, will overcharge your damage and make you temporarily do a bit more damage from weapons and secondaries. This is super good and makes killing people really easy. The weapon overcharge is a bit more nuanced, as it increases your weapon power pool. It doesn't necessarily increase your damage, and in no way, shape, or form really does much to amp up your weapons. What it does do is let you sustain fights longer. You can hold down the left trigger and essentially go to town, as you will be shooting for a fairly long time as long as you don't have a weapon with a very high weapon power cost. Shield overcharge, as it states, will overcharge your shields. This will allow you to, from a neutral position, gain overshields fairly simply without doing anything, as long as you let the shields recharge for a little bit. And from these weapon power shifts that we'll get into later, you will more or less be put back into neutral shields, which is very appreciated. The speed overcharge. This is, in my opinion, the second strongest technically, but I personally, the way I play, consider it the strongest, is the speed overcharge. What this does is it brings your speed energy, or it brings your engine pool to a higher point and temporarily increases your speed and engine power regeneration. This lets you just fly across the map, especially if you catch one of these when you're on the later halves of your engine pool. This will fully recharge your engine and let you continue on, which basically means you can get from your spawn to the enemy spawn if you get lucky and pick one of these up halfway there. These are very nice, and I recommend looking out for them. They are on the map. They'll be in they'll be like little green There'll be little gray icons on the map that you can see. Look out for those if you can. There is a rhyme or reason to where they're placed. However, I personally have never understood how the map is meant to show you where it is, because it's not a 3D map, it is 2D, and you're flying in a 3D space, so it is a bit harder to find the boosts when they can be vertically above or below you. So just watch out for them if you want to find one. Chances are it'll glow, so you could see that. They made it pretty obvious to see them, but just hunt for them if you want them. There are actually some generic strategies that you want to look out for in Team Deathmatch. These are the ones that I see that are most popular nowadays, and I've run into a decent bit. One of these, the first of which actually on my list, is a gunship cluster. This one has been seen less recently. I want to say that's due to a shift in the player base and not necessarily the game mode or the state of the game, as gunships are still very strong and most people just aren't comfortable with them, which I understand. They're very weird ships, so take that as you will. What a gunship cluster means is you have a cluster of about 2 to 3 gunships sitting in a spot firing at you. That's super spooky. Watch out for those. They're very hard to penetrate, and frankly, not doing so could mean losing a match, which is unfortunate, but that is how TDM goes. The second is scouts. Scouts are extremely important in TDM. They are the counter almost everything ship, and I highly recommend, if you are going to get seriously into GSF, pick up a scout and toss it into your loadout, and you'll thank me later, hopefully, if you understand scouts well enough to use them. I'd say averagely. You don't have to be an amazing scout to get good mileage out of most of them. One of them in particular you do, but we'll get into that when we get there. And number 3, bombers. There is a time to run them and a time to not. That is more so based on if you're running with a team or if you're not. So if you're running with friends and you want to mess around, run a bomber. If you're not, people will generally get mad if you run bombers because generally they are fairly useless in TDM, so attempt to avoid them, but if you want to practice, you still can. Moving on, as stated, you'll be getting a massive boost from the intro mission from your GSF tutorial, from the first quest from GSF, and with that, you want to pick a starter ship. Now, in my opinion, the best starter ship in the game is easily the first one you receive. This is the Strike Fighter Starguard on rep side and the Ricer, on imp side. These are single-handedly the best ships for learners because they're the easiest. They are a double weapons, essentially left click to win ship, and that means 90% of your learning curve is going to be just learning how to aim and fly. So that is very nice and very simple. It's also got one of the cheapest, quote-unquote cheapest learning paths, as you start with most of the things that you're going to use later. You start with rapid fire and heavy lasers as your starting combo, and you start with, I want to say, concussion missiles, which is a very strong option in the early game. You'll start out with your shield, and I don't believe you start out with retro thrusters, but you might. And all the minor components are cheap, so even if you don't start with one, you'll be good. But generally, I believe you start with most, if not all, of the important ones, which is awesome. It means you can get this ship up to max, and doing so will cause you to master the ship, quote unquote, which gives you more ship and fleet requisition while you use the ship. And as you want to learn, you'll be using the ship a lot, hopefully. So you'll be generating requisition, both ship and fleet, a little bit quicker. It's 10%, so it's not that much. Also, if you're a subscriber, which I know it's going to suck, but GSF is slightly pay to win. You gain more ship requisition and fleet requisition if you're a subscriber. This is mitigated by the fact that you can purchase requisitions, so generally don't be too afraid to just get into it. It's still easy for free-to-players to do, and generally it'll take maybe a week longer, but that's not too bad. Moving on to the thing that you need to know how to play GSF with. This is going to be a section on basic keybinds. I recommend that most of these you leave alone, as they are actually in a very ergonomic sort of layout on a generic keyboard. If you aren't using a generic keyboard, like I myself use a gamepad, you might want to tweak these a little bit. I certainly did, as my keypad did not allow me to have certain key bindings in a way that would make sense for me to have, so I kind of had to finagle them a little bit. But if you want to get to your preferences, you'll hit the escape key, go to this preferences tab, and you'll notice there's an entire separate section for Starfighter keybinds. This is nice, they gave us their own section. The first one you'll encounter is the one we want to ignore. So we're going to move down to actually movement, as this is the most important thing in GSF. And I cannot stress that enough. GSF is a movement-based game mode. If you are not moving, you are dying. So you want to practice your movement as much as possible. This essentially means your first 2 or 3 matches, I'd say focus less on trying to fight people and more on trying to just kind of, navigate the map. People are rude sometimes and will just kill you. And veterans are generally good at spotting out new players, so we'll try to not focus you, but sometimes we make no promises. So just try and fly around and more or less enjoy yourself. Any key binding you see that's not generic to yours, I will state now. So your main keys are W, A, S, and D, your WASD keys. These are your accelerate on your W key and decelerate on your S key, which more or less makes sense. And A and D are actually rolls. A roll does not mean a turn. A roll means your ship physically will tilt on its I believe it's the x-axis. Yes, it'll tilt. It will not turn. It will simply shift its position. So keep that in mind. This is not turning. Your turning is handled by your mouse and where you have your cursor on your screen. So pay a little bit attention to that, as it is a keyboard and mouse oriented mode. You need to be using your mouse a lot. Moving on, you'll see toggle throttle. This is actually going to be on the X key for you. This is how you turn off and on your engines. this means you can stop your ship. What this does not mean is you are not instantly stopping in place. This is a space-oriented mode, meaning there is still physics involved, so you will drift slightly forward as you decelerate and then come to a stop. You will not stop immediately. Please don't think you will, because you will die. Next down on the list, we've got the space key. This is the generic one on your keyboard. This is how you boost. What boosting means is it'll give you a temporary boost in speed, as the name suggests, and that is dictated by your engine power. This will be shown with a little bar on the right side. I believe it's generically purple, so there's that. If you're colorblind, I don't know what color it changes to, but it'll be the bar on the right side. Just keep that in mind. Moving down the list, I'm going to say ignore these. Strafes, although important, are not needed, so kind of leave these as is, as they'll come into play if you're playing gunships or any of that. And auto roll, I suggest highly to remove it, as it uses some kind of machine learning. I don't quite know what this is for, to predict how you're meant to roll to avoid terrain. I recommend you learn to roll yourself, as auto roll is slightly unwieldy and fairly unpredictable, and I don't trust it. The more you can keep system game function error out of your playstyle is very nice, and keep human error to a max, because messing up yourself means you can improve. If a game messes up for you, you cannot change that. That is unfortunately stagnant. So remove that. It's not needed. Moving on to the next thing you need to know, weapons and abilities. These are the things that you'll see on your HUD. They'll be down kind of here on the bottom of your screen. Moving down the list, we have your system ability. On the Starguard and a select few other ships, this is your weapon toggle. This is what lets you swap between your... If you have two primaries, it'll let you switch between those. If you have two secondaries, those. If you have any option here that says primary weapon and primary weapon, it'll switch between those. This is not to swap between primary and secondary. You will always have both available to you. You'll never not have one selected. That said, your second, on other ships, this is known as your system ability. This is generally a buff to most ships, and it's kind of dictated as the anything that isn't a weapon shift ability. They're more or less always combat oriented. A few exclusions fly, but you get the point. Every ship has one. There isn't a single ship that doesn't, and they're all for varying things. Moving to the second ability. This is your shield ability. This is your defensive option, I believe. On all ships, this is dictated by this slot, the shield slot. And based on what you have, it'll give you different little buffs. For example, like on the Starguard, with the Quick Charge Shield, it'll do what it says in the description. Do be aware of this, as your shields are fairly important in GSF, so you kind of want to use your shield ability sparingly, while also using it smartly. But that's neither here nor there. That's something you learn with time. Engine ability is your movement option. It is dictated by the engine slot. As you'll see, these all have their own associated thing with this list, except for the last one, which will be in this tab, the crew tab. But for your engines, most of these are going to be some form of movement. There are some like the power converters, which aren't. Those I recommend staying away from, so there's that. But generally speaking, every single ship will have its own. They all do different things with varying degrees of difficulty and success. So with each ship, definitely just use your engine ability once or twice to kind of get used to what it does. And once you more or less know what every single engine ability does, you'll be pretty far ahead of the natural curve, because knowing is half the battle. In your fourth keybind slot, we have co-pilot ability. This ability is a strange one, as it is attached to the crew mechanic of GSF. This is dictated by this slot here, and these 4 choices are dictated by the other 4 choices down here. So more often than not, I'm going to have a build guide associated with this entire tutorial, where you can go and reference the builds that I personally use. These are not the end-all be-all builds. I highly recommend personalizing them to yourself, but They will get you fair and far ahead, as I believe they are all fairly good. And for the most part, the left half of them stay fairly strong, and certain ships get a little into the territory of like meme ships, but that's for fun. Everyone uses that every once in a while. But this gets fairly complicated, and I believe I'm going to have my own episode for it, as it is not difficult to understand. If you're used to stat modifications, this is kind of where that falls into place. As you can see, they all have their own, but we'll get into that when we get to that particular video and or section of the video. Moving on, that's it for this key binding tab. So this was for your weapons and abilities. One thing that isn't included, I don't believe, is how to actually shoot and how to use your missiles. Shooting is left click. That is your generic binding for it. I don't actually know that there's a way to change that in here. I think that's always preset to left and right click. So left click is going to be your primary, right click and hold, with one exception on a scout, is going to use your missiles. You have to hold it, and it will have an audio cue attached to it based on the missile. But that is to lock on to someone, as missiles all have a lock. Bombers and other things change that, but we'll get into that when we get into those ships. So remember, left and right click are your friends. Moving on to targeting, which I believe is also fairly important. As you can see, I have a lot of not binds. This is personal preference, as I believe this entire section is useless. Kind of past here and going down. In fact, one of these is not bound correctly. That should be bound that way. That explains why it wasn't working earlier. Starting from the top, you have select target under cursor. This means wherever your mouse is pointing, the game will find the target closest to your mouse and select that target. This is my favorite way to aim, as it lets you pick your target that you're moving towards, select them, and then begin firing practically immediately. The second key binding is... also note, I believe this is usually set to R. I could be wrong, and it could be set to E. Mine is supposed to be set to E, so I'm going to change that now. But I recommend selecting which between the two you believe is more comfortable for you. Moving on to tab, this is not as important as this type of targeting. However, there is a strong use for this, as generally speaking, if you're finding people and you kind of want to like hover along like outside of vision, you can just tab quickly through and find enemy compositions, and then you can tab back through and find the target you want to actually find. This is very nice because, of course, it'll be tracking that enemy that you want to kill, which means it'll actually lead you to them, which is very nice. And still used sparingly, but is decent in some situations. This one becomes more with a game knowledge kind of thing, in the sense that you have to know when it's safe to just kind of wildly tab through the swath of enemies that you can see. F, your next key down here. This is what it... I don't actually know what this is bound to. I unbound it very quickly when I loaded it, as I never particularly use this. However, I play gunships a lot now, so free look is decently useful there. But I still don't think free look is as good as it could be. It locks you in place, meaning you can't quite maneuver your ship while you have it on, and that's dangerous. So I have it bound to F, as that is a good key on my keypad. I don't know what it's bound to generically, but I highly recommend swapping it if you do want to use it, and place it on a key binding that is comfortable and easy for you to reach if you want to use this a lot. Moving down to the next key binding is your target camera. This means your camera will snap to whatever target you're looking at, or otherwise have targeted. I really should turn off guild invites. But this is actually useful on gunships in particular, not necessarily other people or other ships, but it's still okay to try kind of get your bearings and see where someone is. But once again, this is more of a situational thing and used sparingly. This key binding I have unbound. This is because I have two monitors. That's really it. This is to toggle your mouse, meaning it'll keep you moving, but it'll unbind your mouse so you can like hover over your abilities to see what they do and kind of stuff like that. So it's kind of nice. This is the toggle. I have the hold mouse because, like I said, I have two monitors. So this will let me temporarily hold Z and move to my second monitor and move back and etc. You know, stuff like that. Q, which I don't actually think that's what this is set to. Again, I don't know what a generic key binding is, as I didn't particularly look it up. Once again, I quickly moved off of this. Actually, we can just do this. It's set to R. So, yeah, that's in a decent spot, actually, if you have your other key binding to E. However, I have mine set to Q, as it's right next to W, so it's nice. This will essentially cycle through the targets that have shot you recently. And what that means is anyone that's hit you with a primary weapon, I believe. It might be just any damage, but I usually see it more when I get shot by like a primary weapon. It'll let you cycle through the people that have hit you kind of within a certain space of time. This is actually super important. And I didn't personally understand its importance until recently when I rebound it and decided to use it, and it saved my life a couple times because I was able to find the person that was shooting at me and maneuver in a way that would let me turn around and actually fire upon them, which, you know, won me certain scenarios. This entire list down here is the quick look section. I don't use these, so I unbound every single one. I don't know what they're bound to, and frankly, I don't believe that they're in any way, shape, or form useful to you, as generally in GSF, you don't want to look away from where you're flying, as you want to see where you're going. So quick looks are okay. Some that I would recommend having might be the quick look rear. This just lets you look straight behind you, so it lets you see anyone that's behind you chasing you. But in my opinion, that's what cycle last attacker's for, and with a little bit of know-how and understanding how the targeting system works, you can really get away with not taking quick looks because, like I said, you're going to be not looking where you're going, and there's a chance you'll hit terrain, and terrain is an insta-kill if you're running straight into it. If you graze it, there's like a 2% chance that you'll live because the game's really finicky with how it determines that. But keep that in mind. I recommend unbinding these just so you don't accidentally click them. And if you want to use them, select which ones you want to use and put them on a bind that's comfortable to you. But that is actually going to be it for this section. Moving on to the last and one of the more important as you get down into the later tiers of GSF are your power conversions. These are super important to giving you certain tactical advantages in different scenarios. This comes with game knowledge, and frankly, I will address it more as I get into specific ship breakdowns and understandings of each ship, and kind of give you tips on which ones are important where for each ship. But what I will not do is I will not give you a generalization of what these are good for, as they are not generally applicable. Certain ones are better for certain things, and you should eventually learn what scenario is good for what. So moving down the list, we have weapon power conversion. This will swap all your power, or as much of it, to your weapons as possible, and this will slightly increase power capacity, I believe. It will certainly increase power regen, which is very important on things like gunships, etc. This is an offensive option, and it will slow you down on the engine front, and it will weaken your shields, so be careful with that. But that's more or less what it's used for. Moving on to the second one. Oh, right. This is going to be bound to F1, F2, F3, and F4 respectively. I unbound these, as I said, I have a gamepad, so these are bound to essentially a thumb joystick. That's why these are the arrows, but it's a joystick for me, so it's different. But moving on to F2, which is your shield power conversion. This will move as much power as it physically can to your shields, giving you the ability to generate over shields, which is very good. It's not quite a 200% increase to shields. In my experience, it's more like 175%-ish. It varies, but it's a good, nice little survivability boost. This one is a little more generally applicable on everything but scouts. Scouts are just squishy as a whole, so you can't really avoid that. Even with giving yourself overshields, you'll die fairly fast. But overall, it's good. It will reduce power regen speed and engine power speed as the whole, and then regen speed a little bit. But that can be mitigated with clever use of swapping between the three. F3 as your engine power conversion key binding. This will move as much power to your engines as possible, giving you a temporary speed boost in the form of approximately 10% speed extra, which is fairly good. It lets you get to point A, point B, just that 1 to 2 seconds faster. And it will also increase the regeneration speed of your engines as you're not boosting, which is fairly important to note. And I believe it increases your capacity by a little bit, but it's not really noticeable, as if you're boosting, any boost is going to just eat through it really fast, so don't worry about that too much. This will, again, reduce power to kind of slow down your weapon regen, and this will actually have your shields, so it'll put you into what is known as the yellow shield state. This means your primary shield is weaker, and it is fairly easy to clear, but again, as you are faster, you then trade generic survivability for evadable survivability. So that comes with flight skill and knowing how to abuse terrain and line of sight and stuff like that to your advantage. And that makes this, again, arguably to myself, I believe this is the stronger of the power conversions, just across the board, with the exclusion of gunships, as gunships are the weird ships of GSF, and just everything is backwards for them. But overall, strikes and scouts see great use of this, and even bombers sometimes, but, you know, bombers are bombers, so we'll get there when we get there. Moving to F4. F4 is default power conversion, and what this means is, if you spawn into a match and don't touch power conversion, that is this. That is what you will be in the neutral state. Everything will be as it says on your generic sheet. So if we look in here, all these stats are going to be as they say. They will not change in any significant way. And this is okay. However, I don't actually believe there's a reason to stay in default power, except maybe like a point fight. But then you kind of want shielder weapons, so it's a good thing to know how to do, as it can train your brain to move to a power conversion and then move back when you're not using the power conversion. So let's say you're using engine power conversion, you get to where you want to be, but you don't really need either of these yet. You just swap to default, and that's kind of okay. It's acceptable. You'll be in a neutral survivable state, and that's nice. Sometimes it can help you be saved, and sometimes it can get you killed. It really depends. These are all situational, as I said, and these come with, I'd say, intermediate-ish knowledge, but not really. I have had a decent few of the people I've trained want to learn this quickly, and to that I respected them, and they used it fairly well. I'd say a decent chunk of them got good mileage out of it, and picked up how to use these well fairly quick. Moving on to some personal key binding changes. I believe I already went through them as I went through the thing, but I had Q set to cycle last targeters, which was very good, and as I stated, all my quick looks are unbound, so there's that. And that is actually going to be the end of this first video. These are going to be bulk recordings. As you can tell, they're all going to be fairly long. If you look at my channel, you'll see that there was an old tutorial. I am not satisfied with that one, and believe that it could have been better, and this is my attempt to make it better. I will recommend not putting feedback, as I am bulk recording these, so don't bother, sorry. But I am going to be stopping with what I believe is the end point for beginners. I'm not going to be trying to do what I did with the old one. I was trying to encompass the entirety of GSF, which is a terrible idea, as this ship increases quickly in difficulty based on player skill level. So just once you get through the basics, you then have free time to learn about the fun stuff. Most intermediate to masterful things generally just kind of mean you are dealing with movement stuff and kind of the creative aspects of GSF. So that is honestly the best capstone a game could have. once you understand game knowledge, and then the game knowledge allows you to do some crazy stuff, that is a good place to be. And, abuse what you learn. So that's good. This will be kind of a long series. I apologize. However, I'm going to be timestamping every little thing I say, down to the section splits. So if you noticed in this video, I had a section on where you start in the fleet, where you need to be. I didn't actually go over one thing, which was how to open your hangar. That is just H key. Do that. I went over your quest progression. Man, English is hard. And kind of went over the conquest benefits and the loot. Understanding loot in GSF is a bit weird, so when you open a box, you'll see what you get. I went over the game modes, what the two you'll see. Went over the best starter ship, being the Star Guard. Please use it, it's good. And the rest of the video was key bindings. And I'll argue to say that key bindings was the more important section. If you're going to take anything away, you're probably going to take that, as key bindings kind of, let you do stuff in the game. So these will be broken into nice little timestamps down below. Use those. I will also have nifty little cue cards kind of in the video to say when they're splitting. These are going to be a little more edited. I don't really like heavily editing my videos, so you'll notice that very quickly. But these will have sort of nice little chapter card dealio thingies, and hopefully a better intro and outro, so look forward to that. But for now, that was all for the first dive into GSF. I thank you all for watching, and good luck out there, you new pilots, and have a wonderful day.